Hi, this is Jeff Davis with the Davis Group coming to you with agent training number 22, working with transaction coordinators. Now, in real estate, there is a lot of paperwork involved. And as an agent, in all honesty, you need to have a basic understanding of that paperwork. But what makes it very complicated here in California is you have to be able to make sure things are done on time, sequentially, in order, because at any given moment your files can be audited. And I'm talking now from the broker perspective. So it is incumbent upon the broker to make sure that every single transaction is done precisely the way that it's supposed to be. And to be honest, most agents don't know how to do that. It's not something you go to school and get trained on. It's procedurally what needs to happen, and not saying that you can't learn what it is, but typically the way that it's being solved in the real estate industry is by using what's called a transaction coordinator. Now, in since there's so much paperwork and there's not a lot of time to deal with all this paperwork, the transaction coordinator gets involved once the contract has been signed. So this is a person who understands the process, stays on top of the process, and helps agents to focus on what they need to be doing. Let me say this to you. Know your job. You are a real estate agent, and your responsibility is to work with sellers or work with buyers, because those are the only two scenarios where you can get paid. Now, there are other things that you can do in the midst of real estate, but if you're an agent and you're not working with sellers, you're not working with buyers, you're not going to get paid. So you want to focus your attention on the things that get you paid. And what you don't want to focus on is all of the paperwork that can keep you from working with sellers and working with buyers. This is why we pay for the services of transaction coordinators. Now, depending upon whether it's a listing agreement or a sales contract, the documents required may vary. But you need to, first of all, fill out the contracts completely and make sure that every place that requires a signature is signed, every place that requires an initial is initialed, because if you don't do this, you're going to have to go back and you're going to be wasting time doing something that you should have taken care of the first time. So you want to make sure that when you go through the contract and you're walking your client through the contract, you make sure that there are no spaces. You have to initial and sign, and not you, the client does, but you have to show them where these things are needed and make sure they do it. Now, here's an overview of the closing task. So once the transaction coordinator gets the contracts and things in, they kind of help to move the deal along, to take it from contract stage to closing stage. And so our job, of course, is to keep them in the loop and to also communicate with them to find out where you are in the process. You don't give your deals to a transaction coordinator and never talk to them again. You have to have an open line of communication. And you also want to work with somebody that you can work with, because you need to have not only a pleasant but a viable working relationship with your transaction coordinator. So, here's an overview of some of the things they're going to be looking at. They're going to be documenting they're going to be preparing the documents to make sure they're in compliance. They're going to begin the title work. Typically, it'll go from the transaction coordinator to the escrow company where it needs to go in for escrow, and they will begin to open up the title work. They're going to also monitor the mortgage process. It's good to have your transaction coordinator able to speak with your loan officer. Now, the way some loan officers work is they stay on top of their files. Others have a processor in the office who stays on top of the file. Whichever way that bank works, your transaction coordinator needs to coordinate with that person, because they're going to want to have regular updates of what's going on in the mortgage process, especially if problems occur, because then they let you as the agent know so that you can get on it and fix it. They will help to coordinate the home inspection if you need one. Sometimes you have to order a home inspection, and most times, honestly, buyers are going to, so they help to coordinate that. They will also help to track the appraisal. Once the property has been, once the buyer has gone in for a loan, bank's going to order an appraisal, and so typically the transaction coordinator stays on top of that. They're going to be communicating with everybody involved, listing agent, selling agent, all of the parties involved, to keep everybody abreast of the transaction. And when all the documents and everything's are in, they're going to help to schedule the closing date. Keep this in mind. When you're working with an escrow company, the escrow company will close your transactions. They do not set your closing dates. So that has to come from either you or your transaction coordinator, because they will do as instructed, but they're not going to say everything is in, we're ready to close, what date do you want. They don't do that. Your TC will. Your TC will inform you that, listen, Jeffs, everything is in, deal's ready to close, I'm going to set it up. I'll let you know when the date is as soon as possible. And they're going to make sure the file is compliant after closing. Again, you and I don't get paid until the files pass compliance. So the more we can do to make sure that file is compliant, the quicker we get paid. Real estate agents get paid once the title changes hands, the buyer gets the keys, the seller gets their check, then we're paid. So technically what happens is, let's say the closing happens in an escrow company. Then once everything has been funded and the buyers now are gone, the sellers are gone, the real estate company will end up getting their portion of the check, typically electronically. Once the check comes in to us, then compliance begins. We want to make sure before we close out the file and pay the commission that everything is in compliance. Now, if you've been doing this as you should have, and your TC has been on it as they will be, compliance should not be a complicated issue. However, it's once the file passes compliance, do you get a check? So you want to make sure it gets through again as quickly as possible. So when you turn things into the TC, number one, make sure that all the signatures on the contract are there. Don't have them give it back to you to tell you to go back and get signatures or initials. When it comes to listing agreements, you want to make sure that the listing is signed by everyone that has an interest in the house. Meaning that if there's a husband and wife, they both need to sign this. If there's a husband and wife and a brother-in-law who all on title to the house, you need to have signatures from everybody. Why? Because if the person who did not sign has a problem with the transaction, they can hold everything up. So you want to make sure that everybody who has an interest in this house signs. You also want to turn in any disclosures that you need to have to the TC. Same thing works here with the buyer's agent agreement. You want it to be signed by everybody. You help to find a house. So if you got a house and there's going to be a husband and wife, again, you want both signatures. If there's going to be 3 people involved, husband, wife, and a brother-in-law, you want 3 signatures. Keep this in mind. You always want to have everybody involved who has an interest in the transaction. Because if you don't have their signatures, you can have problems if they disagree. And then finally, we have what's called an associate's disclosure, which needs to be signed by the buyer, and it'll be signed by the seller. So if you're going on a listing appointment, you have the seller sign one. You're doing a buyer's agreement, you have the buyer sign one. And basically it discloses how the commission is paid. If a selling agent wants to get paid commission on our deals, there has to be an agreement up front that that's going to happen, because it is no longer a part of the contract. So we have to have some type of an agreement, because the agreement, the listing agreement now only focuses on our commission. It does not focus on anyone else. It doesn't focus on the selling agent. There is no cooperative commission any longer. So again, we want to make sure that we are looking at all of these forms, get everything signed, get everything turned into the TC, communicate with that TC on a regular basis, and close your deals.